game time, guys. A year from now, probably 100% of you are going to know where your kids are going off to college the following fall, which is pretty wild, right?
That's
So
exciting.
it's very exciting. It's very exciting. So we are getting there. So I guess by quick way of introduction, I'm assuming for most of you, this is the first time you've met Peg or myself. My name is Matt Carpenter. I'm just north of excuse me, Boston, Massachusetts, specifically Salem. That's kind of our headquarters, so to speak, but we are very spread out geographically as a company. College Aid Pro is the company, and we've got a really, Peg and I think, are usually pretty grateful for the jobs that we have, and that's guiding families through this whole process, right? This financial aid scholarship process. We want to serve as your North Star, your shepherd. This is a confusing process. It's overwhelming. It's your kids. It's your money. It's all of that, right? So it's always very easy for me to understand why folks get overwhelmed, but we love it, right? And we really take that responsibility seriously, and just want everybody to be educated and understand ultimately what their affordable path to college is. And the great news is as scary as these sticker prices are, and intimidating as it can be, every single person has an affordable path to college, right? I don't care if you have very low income and no resources or savings, or you're the opposite end of the spectrum and you're not going to gain financial aid, but you're feeling intimidated by these $90,000 a year sticker prices. We can help you, right? So and that's what we're here to do, right? And ultimately we have a pretty ambitious mission. That's the end the student debt crisis. That doesn't happen by forgiving debt. It happens by making good decisions beforehand, right? And that's kind of our deal. So so hopefully that's helpful by way of quick background. And let's make this thing interactive, guys. Ask all the questions you can possibly think of. Nothing's too stupid. Nothing's too personal. You can remain anonymous. That's a great part about these things being virtual now. You don't have to raise your hand in front of your peers, right? You can be anonymous. Ask us anything you want. I dare you to try to stump me and Peggy. It just can't happen. It's not mathematically possible here. So, about
put your questions in the Q&A versus the chat. We might ask you to put some stuff in chat during the presentation, but otherwise put in the Q&A. And as Matt said, you can be anonymous. Also, we will send out the recording and the deck tomorrow. So if you need to leave early, want to share it with your spouse, whatever, your child, or you just want to listen to it again, you'll have all of that. So
great call. Thank you. Now, Peggy, let me tee her up quickly. This is the fairy godmother of financial aid here, live and in the flesh. Peggy's been doing this for a very long time. I had sought her out because I always thought she was kind of one of the most knowledgeable professionals in this space. I think you'll find her personality to be very infectious, and she has done this herself, right? And which is maybe the best thing she can put on her resume, sending a couple of kids to college, twins no less. So if there's a couple of you on here with multiples, Peggy gets you. So Peg's out there in Seattle, coming to you guys from the West Coast here. But Peg, if you want to talk about yourself real quick and then dive in,
Yeah. So my background is in the financial industry, and when my kids, my twins, as Matt just said, hit high school, kind of did a deep dive into how the whole thing works, not the saving, but the other piece. And as all of you know, I was shocked at how complicated it was, and so much different than when I was a kid. So I kind of made the decision at that point to kind of pivot in my career and focus exclusively on this. And so I started my own business, met the guys at CAP, helped beta test their software, and we've just been in communication ever since. And a couple of years ago, it just made sense for me to join CAP. I was a little bit sick of being on my own, honestly, and doing everything and wearing every hat. So it worked out really well. I got to inherit a really great team, got to work with these guys. So that's my background. And as Matt said, I understand where you're sitting. And really, I'll share my deck now, or our deck now. As Matt said, our mission is to end the student loan the student debt crisis by empowering you to shop smarter for college. And what that really means is we're going to educate you on each step of this process so you understand how it works. You understand how financial aid works, but then even more importantly, you understand where you fit. And it could be different if you have twins from one kid to the next and from one college to the next, as it totally depends on how much the school costs and your financial situation. It's really unique to each family. So if you are an informed consumer in this process, you are so far ahead of the game, because the colleges don't bank on that. They really bank on a lot of parents drift through this because it's confusing. It's confusing. It's stressful. You have a lot of other things going on in your life. And it's just a really expensive thing to drift through. So we will guide you on this journey. This is our first webinar that we do. That's kind of the, how does this all work? Financial aid 101, if you will. You're starting this process. You're about to get into financial aid forms in the fall. So let's kick into this. There we are. Let me move that Zoom thing. So all of you, they got an email, right? We sent it out this morning, Matt. Yeah. So you guys all should have gotten an email encouraging you to set up your free MyCap account. We're going to go in there later. What it does is it tells you your EFCs, soon to be called SAI, student aid indexes. So when we're educating you about this, if you've got that set up, you can actually look on another computer and see, okay, Peg and Matt are telling me this is what it means for me, and actually look at it. So it's hugely valuable if you have that set up while we're teaching this stuff, because then you can take what we're teaching you and actually put it right into your situation. So if you haven't done that, sure, Matt put it in the chat. Go ahead and set that.
I put the link in there, Peg. So you guys, if for those of you that haven't created your account, I recommend you take 2 minutes and do it right now, because the goal is, right, we're going to teach you how this works from kind of a high level, but if we do our jobs right, before, by 1:30 here, you guys are going to understand specifically how this works for you. Are you going to be eligible for financial aid? How much, at which colleges, etc. Right? Because obviously everybody's different. And although the kind of system from a high level works the same for I don't know, from a rules standpoint, everybody gets treated differently at different colleges. So we want you to know exactly where you fit on that spectrum.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So let's dive in here. So how does this, I affectionately call it crazy world of financial aid, how does this all work? So basically, I'm here to tell you, and Matt would totally agree, all these colleges are on sale. So there's this sticker price, this cost of attendance, which is the whole enchilada. It's been going up for decades, as we all know on this webinar. But it's irrelevant if you know what you're doing, because you will have schools for sure that are discounting the price. And they're doing it in one of 3 ways, or a combination of these. The first way they're doing it is with what's called need-based grants. So they're taking their endowment money, they're figuring out what your financial need is, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And then they're saying, okay, Jones family, here's a $10,000 grant because you have need that we've calculated. So that's what we call gift aid. It's free money. It's basically them giving their endowment money and decreasing that cost of attendance. The second bucket, again, gift aid again, is given for the opposite reason. Not opposite, but very different, right? It's not based on your financials. It's based on your child. It's based on their grades, test scores, talents, music, athletics, whatever it happens to be. But again, it's this endowment money that the Office of Admissions is saying, we don't even care about your ability to pay. We don't care if you've got Bill Gates' financial background. We want you, we want that student, so we're going to start discounting it. And it's typically 5 figures a year. So we're not talking about $1,000 here or there. We're talking about some big money, right? And a lot of schools do this. So those are the 2 buckets that they discount with, that are the free stuff, the endowment. The third bucket, called we call it self-help. This is going to be the loans and the work study. So this is part of a lot of people's college funding strategies, which is totally fine. You have to work for one of them and you have to pay back the other. So It's fine that it's part of it, but you want to try and maximize one or both of the other two buckets if possible. And the only way you can do that is by understanding how these colleges function and how they're discounting their sticker price. So let's first talk about need-based aid, and then we're going to talk about merit, because a lot of families don't have need-based aid eligibility. But I strongly encourage you to understand your EFC/SAIs. Don't listen to your family and friends about, you'll never get any money. Everybody's different. So you want to take the steps to understand this for your family. So in the need-based area, what the colleges have is a very simple equation. Their cost of attendance, which again is that sticker price. So it's tuition and fees, room and board, books, travel, and personal expenses. That gets set every summer for the upcoming school year. So they take that number, they subtract what's called, up until now, it's been called an expected family contribution. We still have it in here because if you've been doing any reading, you've seen that EFC. Starting with all of you guys, since you've got kids that are graduating in 2024 from high school, it's going to change this fall. We're going to talk about it in a few minutes. It's just going to be called the Student Aid Index. There's some changes in how it's going to be calculated, but that part, it's just a name change. So if you see SAI, it's the same thing. So the cost of attendance minus this EFC/SAI, that's how you get your need in the college's mind, what they think you can afford for a year. You're submitting financial aid forms so they can calculate this SAI. That's the whole reason you're doing that. If you have an SAI of $100,000, thank God there aren't any schools that cost that much. You're not going to have any need, right? Because if the school costs 70 and they think you can afford 100, there's no need there. If the school costs 70 and your SAI is 40, then you have $30,000 of need. It doesn't mean the college is going to swoop in and give you aid to fill all of that. Some schools will, but that's your need. So that's a very simple equation of how it works. So how is this calculated? How is the SAI calculated? There's two big buckets. There's assets and there's income. And they look at the parent assets and income and the student assets and income. As far as the assets are concerned, non-retirement assets are the only assets that are looked at. So if you have balances in a 401k, 403b, Roth IRA, traditional IRA, pension, those are all retirement accounts. So good for you. The financial planner in me is giving you a pat on the back, but you don't disclose those on the FAFSA, which is the federal form, and it's not included in the calculation. So that's a huge takeaway. That's one of the biggest mistakes that people make on these forms, and then their EFC shoots up. On the non-retirement side, 529s are part of that. So if you have a college savings plan and you as the parent are the owner, that's considered an asset of yours, because technically it's not a gift to your child. Your child's a beneficiary, but you can always use those funds. You can take them out. You're going to pay a penalty and tax, but it's, as I said, it's not like an UGMA or an UTMA. So if that means something to you, those are actually gifts to your kids. So if you have one of those accounts, that is an asset of the student, and there's strategies to change that. I'm just planting that seed. So this is a big one too, a big mistake. And it's important because student assets are assessed at 20 or 25% as opposed to the parents, which is up to a little bit shy of 6%, right? So big difference there. So that can really shoot up your EFC. So keep that in mind. Also, any other non-retirement, you have stocks, you have bonds, you have CDs, checking and savings. If you have real estate that's not your primary home, that's included on both financial aid forms that we're going to talk to you about today. And the equity in it, which means the market value minus any liabilities you have. If you have a HELOC, if you have a regular mortgage, that's what your equity is. So on extra real estate that's not your home, that's part of this non-retirement asset bucket as well. People will always ask, well, hey, I have car loans. I still have student loan debts. I have debt. I have credit card debt. It's not asked about on the form, but this is a time when you don't want to be shy with the colleges. If you have a strain on cash flow that is not visible to them, you're going to want to share it. You just have to reach out to the colleges. And then the last little bullet in the right corner ties into what I was just talking about real estate. Anything but your primary home is fair game. But the FAFSA, which is the form that most colleges only require, and we'll talk about it in a minute, they do not look at your primary home, so the home that you live in. So that is not included. There is another form that does, that is called the CSS profile. If your child is applying to some of those schools, it's fine. When you are asked about your home and the market value of your home, you want to be honest, but you don't want to shoot for the moon. You don't want to put the price you really want to get and stage it and wait for that perfect offer. You want to put the lowest defensible market value, and then you can take off about 15 or 20% from that. Well, it's called the IRS quick sale value, because we all know you don't get every penny when you sell a home, right? There's closing costs, there's realtors, the whole bit. So just keep that in mind. And we'll touch on that again when we talk about the CSS profile. It's really applicable to just those schools. So that's the asset part. And then
Peg, let me just interject for 1 second here, because we got a couple of questions and they're good ones of, well, what if my kid has a savings account and we're both have our names on that account, right? And this is fairly common. So let's just say your kid's they're an industrious kid. They've saved from their first communion, their summer jobs, whatever. We get $10,000 in their savings account. Now, that's not a huge amount of money in the grand scheme of things, but even that amount is enough to impact your SAI and therefore your need-based financial aid eligibility. If it's in the student's name, if it's $10,000 in the parent's name, that's not going to move the needle in terms of your aid eligibility, but it will if that amount is in the student's name. So the takeaway there is to just include that as a parental asset, as a part of your savings. It's going to have that's going to maximize your eligibility for financial aid. And again, Peg said this, but that's why it's so important that if you own a 529, you include it as your money, not the student's. Very common, very problematic mistake. So, yep, good questions there.
Yeah,
guys.
and also, because I'm sure we'll get this question, if grandma owns a 529 or anybody that's not inside the nuclear family, that doesn't go on the form. Okay, so that completely gets left off. You can use it to pay for college, but that gets left off. So you don't want to include that either if somebody else is the owner. So that's the asset piece. The second part of this, as I said, is the income. Parental income is by far the biggest driver. It's assessed at a much higher rate than parents' assets. And income kind of is what it is, right? If you have weird stuff like a capital gain or you did a Roth conversion or something, that can be talked about and appealed, right? But your adjusted gross income, unless those pieces are in there, your earnings, they are what they are. And the way that it's looked at is it's actually a 2-year look back, and it's called prior year. So all of you, unless somebody squeaked in later who's got a 2025 child, you guys are all, this is coming up this fall, and the questions are all going to be about the 2022 tax year. So by then, you will have filed, even if you're on extension. That goes through October 15th. So you'll have them all done. You'll need to have them handy. That's what you're going to use for that year. Assets, on the other hand, are literally the value of your assets when you hit submit, whereas income is this 2-year look back. As I said, mostly based off of AGI. There's a few add-ins, but that's the biggest part of this. Students, on the other hand, there's an income allowance for students on the FAFSA that's going to continue to go up and get to be a little bit over $9,000. So they can make about $7,000 and it's a wash. So most kids are not making more than that. Even my son, who worked throughout the school year and the summers, he didn't pull in more than $7,000. So it shouldn't be a big part of the calculation on the student side, but on the parent side, it is. And believe me, it's good to make a nice living. It's just part of the calculation and part of the process. So those are the two pieces and the timelines associated with them. So You might be thinking, you might be looking at your MyCap saying, oh, my EFC, my SAI is kind of high. So I don't think I'm going to be eligible for need-based aid anywhere. That is common. A lot of the families that Matt and I have worked with over the decades, over 50% don't have need-based aid eligibility. That doesn't mean that you can't get discounts. Remember that second bucket called merit scholarship. So that's where this kicks in. And Matt, I'll let you take over here.
Totally right. And I think the need-based financial aid process is still a little bit, it's complex. It's more complex. There's more variables. There's more acronyms to be thinking about, right? Some of these acronyms I'm sure you're hearing for the first time, right? And we'll go over an actual case study or two that I think will help kind of further solidify what Peg just coached you up on. But there's going to be a percentage of you that there's no magic wand that we or anybody can wave that's going to make you eligible for need-based financial aid. And that's okay, right? You know, a part of that, in some ways, easy for me to say, of course, but that's a blessing because it means there's some income, there's some resources there. That's the good news. The bad news is you're looking at this going, oh boy, you might be considering yourself what we call internally, we call kind of bubble families. And these are the families that are not getting need-based financial aid or not getting much need-based financial aid, but certainly do not feel like they are in a position to start writing checks for $90,000 a year, right? And I think in some ways, these types of households have some of the biggest challenges in navigating this process. So I want to make sure that we focus on this a little bit here, and not that these concepts won't apply to those of you that have a lower EFC or SAI, they will. So I think the most obvious thing that we think about when we talk about, well, how am I going to get discounts? Merit-based scholarships, right? Who is going to give my kid a merit-based scholarship? How much, at which colleges, et cetera. And we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on this specifically in a second here through our platform. And those of you that are already on the platform, which I see is most of you, you're probably already doing some experimenting to see which types of schools are going to give you scholarships and how much. But before we go there, a couple other things I want to hit on here. Number one, it's very common for us to run into families that either know or think they're not going to get need-based financial aid. So they say, well, that means I'm not doing the FAFSA. That means I'm not doing the CSS profile. We don't recommend that. We're feel pretty firm in our recommendations that you should be doing these forms no matter what. There's a multitude of reasons, but one of them that's relevant here is that a meaningful amount of colleges will not consider you for merit-based scholarships unless you do the financial aid applications, right? We always use NYU as an example there, right? New York University, because it's a very popular school, not too far from you guys. And they're just one of these schools, and they're also obviously wildly expensive. So if we want to have a chance to not pay full rack rate, we got to do those applications, right? And every school is different. Okay. Every school is different. All these business models are different. We often refer to colleges as their own private businesses because I think that's the right mentality that you should have as consumers as we're navigating this process. But it's not a one size fits all. And obviously each of you as families and as students are unique as well. So it's about figuring out, well, what are the schools that we think are going to be a good fit for us that are also interested in the type of student or the individual that we are as applicants, right? And that the next thing I want to flag here where we have the asterisk is something that in my experience is not common knowledge. And that is the fact that there's about 100 colleges in the country now where merit-based scholarships do not exist, okay? And that's the case for every Ivy League school, okay? So there's not one kid on one Ivy League campus that's there on a scholarship. If they're getting a discount, it's because they're getting need-based financial aid. This goes for athletes, the most talented musicians, artists, students, it doesn't matter. Nobody's there on a scholarship. This is the case for just about all of the NESCAC schools. So Middlebury, Bates, Bowdoin, Colby, Amherst, Williams, Tufts, right? No scholarships. Even schools like, I'm trying to think, schools that are not too far from you. Yeah, Washington Lee in Virginia, or Washington and Lee, Franklin and Marshall in Pennsylvania, right? No scholarships, right? So again, it's just important that you know that as you're building your list. If you're one of these families that not going to qualify for need-based financial aid, but also not ready to start cutting checks for these astronomical sticker prices, we just need to be aware of that. It doesn't mean don't apply to those schools. It doesn't mean you're not going to go to these schools. We just always love to hedge our bets. I think that's a good mentality to have. And the last one here, and I'll tease this before we close today, is that oftentimes, and this is something that we're getting some, as a matter of fact, Peg had it. What was that huge victory you had at which school, Peg? You got $20,000 more from what college?
That was at Johns Hopkins.
There you go. Right in your backyards, guys. So one of the families that Peg works with, they got their offer from Johns Hopkins. She coached them up on how to go back to Johns Hopkins. They came back with $22,000 more or something like that, right? Pretty amazing, right? But I share that story to say, number one, that's a thing. You can push back and get a better deal if you do it the right way. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but one seed I want to plant today is that a part of what makes that process successful, or at least stacks the odds in your favor, is applying to competing colleges. Again, especially if we're not eligible for need-based aid, right? I have, we work with a lot of families that are STEM type families, and maybe they loved RPI in New York, right? And that's where they want to go. And they hated WPI in Worcester, right? In Worcester, Mass here. I make them apply to WPI in Worcester just because I know we're going to use that as leverage when we go back to RPI, and of course, vice versa. So that's just one example that popped in my head, but hopefully you all get the concept there. And that's why, as you're building this list, we want to be thinking about those things. So Peggy, if I could, I will share my screen here. So this is, again, I think just about all of you have already created your accounts. If you haven't, you can go do it right now, but this is your home dashboard, right? So this is what you're looking at. After you've onboarded yourself onto the platform, you've answered, taken a couple minutes, answered about a dozen questions. And the first thing that you see are these EFCs staring you in the face, right? So right away, you're going to say, okay, good news, bad news, middle, whatever. I will tell you, if there's a few of you on here where you see your EFCs and they kind of took your breath away in a bad way, that's a normal experience. This is just one of the reasons in which the system in general is inherently flawed in terms of what the federal government and these colleges think you can pay based on your income, assets, et cetera. And the other big challenge, or again, another problem or challenge, is that cost of living really isn't taken into account here. Technically, it's baked into the calculation, but it's not meaningful. It's not how it really works, right? Basically, your income in your neck of the woods, which is a more expensive part of the country to live in, is looked at the same way as if you lived in, rural South Dakota, right? Which is obviously just not right, but that's
and realize too, these numbers, because we always get, these are annual numbers. These aren't times 4. And I, like I said, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've had one parent who didn't fall off their chair when they saw it. Most parents are shocked at how high this number is. And a lot of times there's nothing you can do about it, right? So, but you are becoming an informed consumer, as I talked about at the beginning, if you understand these. It's kind of the tip of the iceberg to get into this process. So
totally. So this is a good case study, right? This is a family in actually my little city here in the Boston area. But you see their federal EFC is $3,000. Their institutional EFC, and again, going to be SAI for you guys, is $29,000. Gigantic spread, right? Why is that? Why is there this huge difference? Well, two big reasons here, and this is very common for families that kind of check these two boxes, or one of these two boxes. Number one, this is a divorced family. This is a 2-household family. Okay. The federal, and we'll talk in details about this in a little bit. So, but the federal EFC only looks at the household that completes the FAFSA. Okay. They're just looking at one household, whereas the institutional EFC, colleges that use that model, will look at both, right? So our Amherst, BUs, NYUs of the world will look at both households. Schools like Penn State will only look at one. Okay. The other thing to flag here is that the parent who the student lives with is a homeowner. They own their home. They have a meaningful amount of equity in the home. So that is considered a fair game, for lack of a better term, by most of the schools that use this institutional methodology. And there's a variety here. So that's some of the why. I'm telling you more than you need to know in some ways, right? What I want you guys focused on as you first kind of are entering this process, I want you to focus on what schools are actually going to cost you. For most of you, the sticker prices are going to be irrelevant. And I just want you focused on the net cost that you're going to end up paying at this school, should your student be accepted. Okay. And if you want to, you can click on any school. I'm picking on Santa Clara here out in the West Coast in the Bay Area. And, but this holds true for any school. If you want some more intel in terms of the why, well, why is our net cost $32,000 and we're not paying full sticker price? We're going to give you some information here, right? In this family, they're going to be eligible for some need-based financial aid, a whole lot. They're also going to be eligible for a merit-based scholarship, but you won't get both. In most cases, colleges don't what they call stack financial aid. You don't get grants and scholarships. You get the higher of the two numbers, essentially.
In most cases.
In most cases.
I would say it's, I do see it, but it's a specific family where they get merit and there's still need left. So, yeah.
Yeah, right. So exactly right. And the platform will account for that in those exceptions. And then the other thing that you'll see is for any college in the country, we have every scholarship that they offer, the qualifications for each, and we're really good at telling you, well, how much is your kid going to get, right? If anything. And again, if you want to take it one step further in terms of the why, you can, right? So you'll see, okay, here's the average GPA and test scores at this school. Here's where my kid fits in. So it makes sense that we're projecting X amount in a scholarship, or we're projecting zero, right? Here's why we're getting need-based financial aid. This is the methodology that they use to calculate it. Here's how generous they are in terms of meeting need-based financial aid, right? It's also interesting to see what's the average scholarship that's given at this school and how many kids percentage-wise typically get a scholarship. So to me, that's some interesting information as you're investigating the price points of these colleges. So let's kind of do a case study here. Why don't you guys just throw a couple colleges in the chat that you're curious to see, and we'll look at a couple and do a little bit of a deep dive and learn how they award scholarships if they do, how they award need-based financial aid if they do. Just throw out some schools in the chat that you guys are thinking about touring, have toured, etc. Okay, so Drexel's an interesting one. We're having some trouble with these guys are one of these schools that are super popular, right? Pretty expensive. They're okay in terms of their generosity. Okay. Now they can be really good in terms of merit-based scholarships. So that's what we're projecting here, that for this is a really smart student. I should qualify that. It's very hard to get a scholarship this generous anywhere, Drexel in particular. This is a really sharp kid. Because they're just okay in terms of need-based financial aid, right? So for such an expensive school, over 80,000, it's going to be more than that next year by a good clip. They only meet 80% of need. So, if your SAI is X amount of dollars, they're not going to come all the way down to it. You're going to have to pay an additional amount there, right? Now this one won't be applicable. We'll look at the University of Maryland, right? Which obviously for most of you is going to be a good deal, in state. But look at they are tough, man, in terms of coming out of state. They are pretty stinking expensive, and they're really competitive, as you guys know as well. So let's look at another one here. So MIT, man alive, if we can get in there, they do a great job with financial aid. The hard part is we got to get in, right? And one of Peg and I's colleagues, one of our teammates, is the director of financial aid at MIT Sloan School of Management. So we have an especially good knowledge of how they work, because one of the folks on our team is one of the head guys over there. So for this family, the thing is, if you are eligible for need-based financial aid, they're so stinking generous, right? Just again, the tricky part is we got to get in. So there's no scholarships there, right? Nobody's going to get a scholarship at MIT. That's another one of these schools where there are no scholarships, but they are incredibly generous in terms of need-based financial aid. You're not going to pay any more than your SAI. And as a matter of fact, they have kind of a unique algorithm that it basically gives you a better deal than most folks are used to getting. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea. And obviously you guys have your own access to your own platform where you can bang around and put schools in there. And again, it's going to be relevant and kind of specific to your family, not just this case study here.
Yeah, so we have a couple other slides that you guys are going to get these tomorrow, like we said, so we're not going to go through them. But as Matt has said, these schools are all different. Some of them give merit, some of them don't, some of them only give a little, some give a lot. That's all the stuff that we have baked in there that we can project for you. So how does all this work? You are all coming up on the year where you're going to be filling out these forms, beginning or sometime in the fall/winter of your child's senior year in high school. So a couple things on this slide to point out. Almost every school in the country requires the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. Most schools only require the FAFSA, and then they're going to use that to give out federal aid, state aid, which could be some of those need-based grants that I talked about at the beginning, as well as need-based grants from their endowment. There are a little bit less than about 300, mostly private schools, that require a second form as well, along with the FAFSA, not in lieu of it, called the CSS profile. So you need to know which schools require both forms and which just the FAFSA. But as Matt said earlier, we strongly encourage you for a bunch of reasons, but one of them is, yeah, some of these schools require the FAFSA on file to give merit aid. So you don't want to leave that money on the table if that's the name of the game for your discounts. Also, like Santa Clara that he just highlighted, they have a policy. If you don't apply for financial aid for freshman year, you never can again. So if you want to roll the dice that your life is never going to change financially, and we've just gone through COVID, your life can change on a dime. All of our lives can. You got to be really careful if you're not submitting them. These forms all have deadlines, just like the admission applications do. And deadlines are super important if you're eligible for need-based aid. If you miss a deadline, you're probably going to get less aid. The colleges will remind you, but they don't always remind you before the deadlines. Hey, we need your CSS profile, that kind of thing. So you and your child have to be proactive about this. And it's actually a good skill your kids need to learn. I mean, they're used to handing in assignments at school and having to be on time. This is even a bigger deal, right? Because it could be, thousands of dollars that you're leaving on the table if you miss a deadline. And sometimes the colleges only will communicate with your child. So they have to be on the ball and watching their email, however the college is communicating, the portal that they have for the school. They've got to be on top of watching that and letting you know what's going on so that you can both address things. So let's talk in a little bit more detail about the FAFSA. Again, you're going to be doing this each year for all these schools because every year they're going to reassess your need-based eligibility. There's very few schools that will lock it in. There are a few, but very few that do. So there's a change this year that's a one-time change. Usually the FAFSA goes live October 1. This year, because of the FAFSA Simplification Act changes, which we'll touch on at the end here, they're still getting their act together. The Department of Ed is still getting this all done. So they have come out and said it's going to be available December 2023. We're hoping that means December 1, but we don't know yet. So you are in our community, you're getting our email. So really pay attention to what we share with you in the coming months, because the minute we know more, we will share it with you. So that's when it becomes available. And depending on your family, you got to decide when you're going to submit it. Most families submit it pretty quickly. The whole timeline is different now. And the deadlines to submit financial aid forms that colleges are going to have to tweak because it's not available October 1 like it usually is. One big thing, and I think Matt kind of alluded to this with the FAFSA, is that only the custodial parent is submitting the FAFSA. And the definition, the new definition for all you class of 2024 parents that starts this coming FAFSA, the definition of the custodial parent is the parent that provides the most financial support. So if you have older kids, you've got to forget that old definition because it's gone. Where the child slept the most nights, that's over. It still has wiggle room in it because it's not just, oh, I'm receiving child support, so it's not me anymore. Not necessarily. You might be getting $2,000 a month in child support, but when you look at all the things you're paying for your child, it might total $2,500. So you really want to get out the calculator, start brainstorming on all of your expenses because it could be well worth your while if the parent that makes less money and has less assets can honestly be called the custodial parent. If the custodial parent, once you figure out who that is remarried, that person's financials are going to go on the FAFSA. It doesn't matter if you signed a prenup. It doesn't matter if the step parent hasn't adopted the child. None of that matters. Those are the rules. Both of your financials will be included on the form, but the non-custodial parents' financials are not asked about and they're not included. So that's a big planning opportunity right there to kind of try and figure that out. The other thing with the FAFSA that you need to get done ahead of time, and we're hearing through the grapevine that this process is going to change a bit and get more arduous, unfortunately, but you have to get what's called a federal student aid ID. Your child needs to get it to e-sign the FAFSA, and whichever parent is going to own this part of the process, and it'll be the custodial parent if you're a 2-household family, needs to get one. And really, they're checking to make sure you are who you are, and then you're going to electronically file this. So if you don't have it, you can't send off that FAFSA electronically. So it's something you want to take care of. You might not be able to do it now for that year if they're changing the process. So I always tell people, don't wait till the last minute, but the FAFSA is not going live till December. So you have some time to do that. But that's something that's unique to the FAFSA as far as getting that done to submit it. This next slide, we're not going to get in detail. We already touched on the 529s over here and about the retirement versus non-retirement assets. We will do a webinar in the fall all about literally line by line submitting these forms, and we'll get in the weeds on the most common mistakes. You're going to get the deck, as I said, so you're going to get these and you can look them over at your leisure. So the second form that I can even change this. We have about 200. It might be 250, 300, mostly, and I'll let you chime in here in a minute, Matt. Mostly private schools. There's a few publics in there: UVA, William and Mary, Michigan, UNC, Chapel Hill. I think that's it off the top of my head. But the rest are private. They require this form with the FAFSA. And there's some key differences that, as you remember when Matt showed the sample family, what we call the institutional EFC/SAI, that's the one that gets calculated off of the CSS profile. For a lot of families, it's higher, and he'll take a few minutes here to explain to you why.
Yeah, and this is the one that gives people fits, guys, right? I'm sure maybe some of you have been through this process with an older student. I'm sure you've heard the war stories from your buddies that have just done it with the class 2023 or whatever, but I think the FAFSA continues to do a pretty good job of being relatively user-friendly. Knock on wood, next year is a iteration better, although we're getting some mixed reviews there, but fingers crossed. The CSS profile is just, I can't defend it's a pain. It's a huge pain. This is what gets people pulling their hair out, right? My very dear friend and Peg and I's colleague, Bill Rabbit, always says that you can get through the FAFSA with a glass of wine or two. You're going to need at least that whole bottle to get through the CSS profile, right? So that I think that's a fair way to kind of set expectations in terms of a mindset for completing this thing. But we got to trudge through it because, again, if we want to be eligible for any of those institutional grants and in some cases scholarships, it's just a necessary evil. But you can take that as a prescription for completing it. But I want to reiterate Peg's point again, because it's an important one, especially this year. You want to put yourself in a position, if you're a divorced or separated family, to have the family that can, to have the household with the least income, least assets, be the one that provides the most financial support for the student, and again, for a lot of families, that's a huge gray area. For a lot of families, it's obvious. For some families, maybe it's not, right?
Hey guys, just a reminder to post your questions in the Q&A. Like, I'll answer the one here in the chat, but just put them in the Q&A so that we can all see them.
Totally, right. So that's a really important point. And again, especially for schools that only require the FAFSA, they're only looking at that one household. A huge distinction for just about all CSS profile schools. They look at the home equity, and they also look at both households in 2 household families. So that is something that again, it matters less who that family completing the FAFSA is, because they're going to look again, and at most cases, there's exceptions, but in most cases, they're going to be looking at both households for 2 household families.
And you are submitting this per student. So if you have an older one and you've got one coming up, because remember, it's their FAFSA, it's their CSS profile. It's not the parents, even though you're probably owning the process. So each child is going to have their own SAI, basically.
Totally. And I think that's it for now, Peg, right? Obviously, we're going to be back in the fall, guys, to go through this, both the FAFSA and the CSS profile line by line. And we'll kind of continue to be your North Star there. Something I want to flag here, as it relates to multiple siblings, you guys are the guinea pigs, the class 2024, for some of the most sweeping changes we've had in higher education for decades. There's some good changes, right? That the biggest one, kind of the headline for us, is that families that need the most help, families that have the least amount of resources, they're getting more help. They're getting more resources. College is going to be more affordable. There's going to be more programs that are going to be easier to qualify for. The FAFSA itself, in theory, is going to be easier to submit, right? There's this really heartbreaking statistic that the Gates Foundation published that says 2/3 of low-income families start the FAFSA and don't complete it, right? Thereby guaranteeing that they're not getting financial aid. And so much of it is because the form's too complex, overwhelming. A lot of these are the language barrier is a challenge, right? Or the students are the one leading the charge, and it's just too tall of a task. So a huge initiative to make this thing easier is so that especially families like that can actually complete the process to give themselves a chance, right? Universally, everybody's behind these programs, but who's funding them is really not the Department of Education, the federal government. It's other families that are going to fund these programs, right? So those families are going to pay less, but it's not coming out of their pocket. It's going to come out of families. The biggest one, I think, divorced families are going to pay more in most cases, or separated families, 2 household families. Small business owners are going to pay more, because it used to be that if you had less than 100 employees, you didn't have to report anything about your business. That's going away. And I think who's going to be impacted most significantly are for those that have more than one child in college at once. Because right now, the rule works the way that it should work, where if a family has an EFC or an SAI of $20,000, for example, and then the next year, now they have another one in college, same income, same resources, okay? So how it works now is that EFC will be divided evenly between the 2 students. It'll be $10,000 each to still give that family a total EFC of $20,000. That rule's going away. So now effectively that same family will have a $20,000 EFC for each of the students. And what this means is that effectively the cost of college is going to double for a ton of families, most families that are going to have more than one kid in college at once. So it's a joke. We are trying to actively combat this. And Peggy, if you can pull it up, or I can grab it actually. If it's
no, I got it. I've got it handy.
If you can pop that in the chat. We started a petition to try to stop this rule change and some other ones that stink from happening. It's been a very big lift and kind of a grassroots effort. We've got over 66,000 signatures. The folks that are the powers that be are telling us they can't do anything until we get 100,000 signatures. So we are 2/3 of the way there. Please sign the petition. It takes 30 seconds. Better yet, an ask of us would be, if you're willing to share it on Facebook, Instagram, whatever. That would be awesome. And we'd be very grateful for it. And even if it doesn't impact you, I promise it impacts, some of your buddies that are going to have more than one kid in school at once.
Oh, I should have gone to that slide. Sorry.
Well, it's all good, buddy. So that covers it, but please sign it, please share it. And then just really quickly, again, we already talked about this kind of at the top, but just planting the seed. We will be, again, just like we'll be guiding you through the financial aid applications, we will guide you through this part of the process. We have a whole presentation dedicated towards it, but I just want to plant the seed early and often. Once you get into an offer from a school, don't take that as a take it or leave it. It is oftentimes possible to go back and do better than whatever you received initially. So that's all I'll say about that for now. We'll be talking lots about it over the next year here.
Let me just because I think there's a little bit confusion, so I just want to repeat it about 2-family households with the FAFSA. It's not you pick the parent that has the less income. The rule is going to be whichever parent provides more financial support, right? So most people always go to child support. Okay, who's ever paying child support is providing more support. My point is that's not always true. Child support is just part of it. Depending on your divorce agreement, you might be receiving child support, but you've got a mortgage. So that child's got a roof over their head. You're paying utilities, you're paying for their food, you might be paying for their premier soccer, which isn't cheap. So be honest, but think about everything that you're spending and really look at that. It's not as cut and dry as whoever's paying child support. You got to tell the truth, but in a lot of cases, if you can be honest, and it can be the parent that is going to show up better on the forms, meaning less income and less non-retirement assets, then by all means, take advantage of that, play that card if you have it. That's the point that we're trying to make. Okay. All right. So at this point, we're almost at the end of our hour here. So Matt and I always tell people, and it's honestly what we believe, that I know I will feel good about saying, I know you've all gotten something from this. One tidbit, probably many more than one, of things that have opened up your eyes. Hopefully you've got your MyCap, you have a good feel for your EFCs. It's already helping you see where you fit, like we were talking about at the beginning, how your child fits at different colleges to get these discounts. That is awesome, but you want to keep the ball rolling. And there's different ways that we can support you. And some of them, sure, you can pay us for some help. We have tons of free resources that Matt's going to show you in a minute. But if you're a DIYer and you love making spreadsheets and you love keeping track of this, awesome. We're going to teach you through this process that you'll be able to do that. And with our free resources, you'll be able to leverage those along the journey. But please, please, please do something. If you're a DIYer, jump in there. If not, we can step in and help you. What you don't want to do is put it on the pile and say, oh, that was awesome, and forget about it, because not a year from now, but maybe 9 months from now, when your child starts getting in and you get award letters, you don't want to have a big gulp when you see what you're expected to pay. And at that point, it's too late to be proactive. Now you're being reactive.
100% right. And I'll just echo that and just say, hey, just continue to follow along with us, right? Again, this is what we do all day, every day. It's what we love to do. I think whatever your question is, we're going to have an answer for you, or know where to go to get it. And to your point, we kind of broadly put families into 3 buckets. Obviously, we're over simplifying, generalizing, whatever, but if you'll humor us, this is kind of how we've positioned ourselves, I guess, and hopefully allow you guys to just self-identify where you fit in this thing, right? For you DIYers, you know who you are. And for all of you, take advantage of the free resources that we offer, because we think they're very robust. We have office hours every other Monday, 7 Eastern time, where it's just a couple of us are there to just do open grab bag Q&A. What are your questions? Let's answer them, right? And you'll have direct access to our team of experts. We have a really active Facebook group that I would recommend that you join. It's moderated by our experts. So it's not just your peers posting questions. You got folks that really know what they are talking about in there, answering your questions. And our YouTube channel is really robust. Subscribe to that. I would challenge you to search anything within that doesn't have a really good answer, and obviously that kind of video content format, in a lot of cases really digestible type thing. So and on that note, if you find a question in there that we don't have an answer to or a resource for, please write into us. We'll have it up there in the next business day. We'll make sure that we have that covered. And then this kind of middle bucket is for folks that are mostly feel like they're in great shape, but just want to gut check a few things and just want like an a la carte kind of hour with somebody right out. Or maybe you're looking at some of these schools like Harvard and MIT, and you'd like to meet with one of the directors there for an hour to get some insight into those types of business models or whatever. Or you have a complex situation, you're divorced and it's not the most amicable relationship, so you want some guidance on how to, what you should be thinking about. You can always book an hour with us through the platform, and just use your kind of Bishop McNamara coupon code there for 15% off. So that's something that's always available to you if you want to engage with us with anything beyond our free resources. And then we have for folks that just don't have the time or the know-how or just want really hands-on help through this entire process, we have options for that as well. That again, I put this link in the chat. You guys can investigate and see what those look like. And again, if you want to engage in any of those, you can use a coupon code. But again, the takeaway here is just continue to follow along with us. I feel incredibly confident that in doing so, we're going to maximize your odds of having as good an outcome as we can have here, and hopefully just bringing down these stress levels and having you guys focus on enjoying the last year and change with your kids living at home for the whole year here. So that's important, right? We don't want to lose sight of that. So
so I have two other things before we let you guys go. One, another free event that we have coming up next week, we're calling our boot camp. So it's 4 days. You sign up once. I'm putting it in the chat. There's the registration link. And we'll have 4 different days with 4 different topics. It's at noon Eastern. If you can't make it, I think maybe a lot of you can because you're on now. It'll be recorded. You'll get the recording. And so we encourage you to sign up for that. We're going to be talking about ACT, SAT, the digital SAT, I believe Matt and I are going to be on. That one will just be kind of solidify everything we're talking about today. That might be a little redundant, but the other ones will not. So definitely avail yourself of that. And Matt, because I don't have a MyCap open, you might want to just go on and show them where to click if they want to book a meeting, just because it's not exactly intuitive.
Yeah, when you're on here, if anybody wants to upgrade to a meeting or anything, it's just right up here in the top right? Say
upgrade or talk to an expert, and you click there, make payment. Don't forget to use your coupon, and then you can see the schedules and all of our people. Matt and I do it, but we, as he said earlier, we have an awesome team that we vet very, very carefully. So we got a lot of good people that can help you at different parts of this process.
All right, guys. Well, exciting to have another Bishop McNamara graduating class to guide through this process here. Again, hopefully you learned a little bit today, and you'll get the recording tomorrow. You'll get the slide deck, and I think any questions that you forgot to ask today, send them in to us, and I think you'll find a great response. And
or hop on office hours.
I think that's it. Yeah, and always your school counseling department too is always looking for feedback too. So if you got any value out of today, please share that with them. If you thought it stunk, don't share that with them.
If you thought Matt was a little too much, but I was great, definitely share that.
We've heard that more than once. We've got that before, Peggy. I think that's just an that is an assumption at this point. So, all right, guys, have a great rest of your day. Looking forward to next time.
All right, bye-bye, everybody.